The road leading to the cabin was long, winding, and nearly forgotten by anyone who had lived in the city for years. Lila leaned back in the passenger seat, her eyes following the patterns of the forest that grew taller and denser with every mile they drove. The city's noise, the honking cars, the endless chatter, the glaring lights, felt like a distant memory, fading with each turn. Her fingers traced the window frame as she tried to imagine the quiet life that awaited them, somewhere far away from all the chaos. Jake drove steadily, one hand on the steering wheel, the other occasionally reaching over to adjust the GPS that had stubbornly resisted giving them a straight path. He wasn't much for adventure like Lila, preferring the comfort of plans and predictability, but he loved her enough to follow. He had seen the spark in her eyes when she spoke of escaping, when she talked about finding a place where they could breathe, think, and simply exist. And so he had packed the car, convinced himself it was a good idea, and now they were hurtling into the unknown. The clouds above were heavy and gray, low enough that they seemed to touch the tops of the tallest pine trees. Every so often, the wind picked up, shaking the car slightly, making Lila grip the edge of her seat with a mix of excitement and apprehension. She loved storms, the way they made the world feel alive, unpredictable, dangerous even. But she also loved the calm afterward, the silence that came when the wind died down and everything smelled fresh and clean. She imagined them arriving at the cabin just as the first drops of rain fell, a dramatic entrance into their new little world. Jake glanced at her, noting the way her eyes reflected the dim light from the cloudy sky. "Are you sure about this place?" he asked, trying to keep his voice light, though he felt a knot of worry forming in his stomach. "It looks a little too remote." Lila smiled, leaning slightly closer. "That's the point," she said softly. "No distractions, no noise, just us, nature, and maybe a little adventure." Her tone carried a mix of challenge and invitation. She knew he worried, but she also knew he loved her enough to try. The cabin appeared suddenly, almost as if it had been hiding behind the trees, waiting for them to find it. It was small, but sturdy, with wooden walls darkened by years of wind and rain, a stone chimney rising proudly from the roof. A thin trail of smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting that someone, perhaps the caretaker or a previous guest, had kept it alive recently. The sight filled Lila with warmth and relief. Finally, they had arrived. Parking the car, Jake stepped out first, testing the uneven ground with cautious steps. The wind was stronger here, carrying the smell of wet earth and pine needles. He could hear the distant roar of a river, hidden somewhere beyond the thick trees, and the sound made him both nervous and fascinated. Lila bounded out of the car, her boots crunching on the gravel, hair whipping across her face, and she laughed. The sound carried in the empty space around them, bright and unrestrained. "This is it," she said, almost to herself, though Jake could hear the excitement in her voice. "Our little escape." She reached for his hand, tugging him toward the cabin. Jake followed more slowly, scanning the area, noting the isolation, the lack of neighbors, the distance from the nearest road. He felt a mixture of relief and worry. It was beautiful, yes, but completely untamed. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood, smoke, and the faint sweetness of pine. Dust motes danced in the soft light filtering through the small windows. Lila ran her hands along the rough wooden surfaces, exploring each corner with a childlike curiosity. Jake, meanwhile, checked the windows, doors, and the fireplace, making mental notes of repairs and safety measures. He could feel the energy Lila radiated. She wanted to dive into everything, embrace everything, experience every detail immediately. He admired it, even if he was more cautious by nature. They unpacked slowly, deliberately, almost ceremoniously. Lila had insisted on bringing only what was necessary, leaving behind the clutter of city life. Clothes, a few books, and personal items were all they had, and even the sparse supplies seemed luxurious compared to the tight apartments they had left behind. Jake made sure the stove worked, tested the water, and made sure there were candles and flashlights in case the storm worsened. Lila hovered near the windows, peering out at the forest, seemingly unaware of Jake's careful planning. The storm began in whispers at first. Distant rumbles, leaves shivering in the wind, the faint scent of rain on the air. Lila pressed her face against the glass, mesmerized. "It's coming," she whispered, a note of excitement in her voice. Jake looked at the sky, frowning slightly. The clouds were growing darker by the minute, moving faster, pushing the day toward night prematurely. "You think we're ready for it?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. They had the basics: food, water, blankets, but storms in the mountains were unpredictable. Lila didn't answer right away. She just smiled, letting the wind tousle her hair. "We'll be fine," she said at last. "We always are." Her confidence was infectious, and for a moment, Jake believed it completely. As the first drops began to fall, tapping against the roof and windows, Lila laughed softly. The sound was like music to Jake's ears, a mixture of joy and defiance. She seemed to love the storm not as a threat, but as a challenge, an adventure. It was her way of reminding him that life wasn't always about caution. Sometimes it was about feeling alive, right here, right now. They lit a fire in the fireplace, the flames crackling warmly against the growing darkness outside. Lila sat close to Jake, sharing a blanket, her hand brushing against his as she leaned back against the wall. The storm raged, wind howling, rain pelting the roof, but inside it was warm, intimate, and safe. They spoke softly, sharing memories of their city life, dreams of their future, and small observations about the forest beyond the windows. Hours passed unnoticed. The storm's voice was constant, but inside the cabin, time seemed to stretch and bend. Lila watched the flames dance, occasionally glancing at the rain, and Jake found himself studying her, noticing how alive she looked in this wild environment, how the city's weight had melted off her shoulders. She was exactly who she was meant to be here, untamed, free, fearless. Finally, as exhaustion began to creep in, they settled into a quiet rhythm. Lila leaned her head on Jake's shoulder, whispering softly about dreams and adventures yet to come. The storm outside did not seem threatening anymore. Instead, it was part of the experience, part of their first night in a place that would become their own little world. For the first time in a long while, they felt fully present, fully alive, and fully together. The night deepened, and the storm's fury seemed to lull, though the wind continued to shake the cabin. Lila's last words before sleep overtook her were playful, daring, and entirely her. "Don't stop me now, cowboy." Jake chuckled softly, shaking his head, unsure if she was teasing him or herself. Perhaps both. He held her closer, feeling a strange sense of peace, despite the storm raging outside. In that cabin, isolated and battered by the forces of nature, the two of them began a chapter that neither city nor storm could touch. It was a night of discovery, of trust, and of exhilaration. The road that had brought them here was long and winding, but for the first time, it had led them exactly where they needed to be. The storm that had seemed distant during their drive grew louder as night settled over the cabin. Rain lashed against the windows in sheets, the wind howling like a restless spirit among the trees. Lila pressed her hand against the glass, feeling each drop hit her palm as though the storm was alive and speaking directly to her. She smiled, a mix of thrill and fascination in her eyes, while Jake paced slowly near the fireplace, his brows furrowed with worry. Jake could hear the storm's raw power in every gust of wind, in every sudden crash of branches against the roof. He moved methodically, checking that the windows were properly latched and that the fire in the fireplace was stable. Lila watched him for a moment, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened whenever the wind rattled the walls. She could see the worry in his eyes, the same worry she had once felt when they had driven up the mountain and she had insisted on leaving the city behind. "Jake," she said softly, not taking her eyes off the storm, "look at it. It's beautiful." Jake glanced at her, unsure how to respond. "Beautiful?" he echoed, the concern in his voice mixing with disbelief. "It's terrifying." Lila laughed, a soft musical sound that cut through the thunder outside. "Terrifying is part of it," she said, turning to him. "The danger, the uncertainty, it makes you feel alive." Her words were like a gentle challenge, an invitation for him to see the storm through her eyes. He shook his head, but he couldn't help a small smile. "You're impossible," he muttered, though his tone carried warmth. He moved closer to her, brushing back a strand of wet hair from her face. "But I guess that's why I love you." The cabin creaked under the force of the wind, and a sudden gust rattled the door. Lila's eyes sparkled with excitement rather than fear. "See?" she said, her voice light but full of energy. "It's testing us. It wants to see if we can handle it." Jake took a deep breath, forcing himself to match her energy, even though every instinct told him to be cautious. He knew she thrived on adventure, on unpredictability, and he admired that. Still, the responsibility for their safety weighed heavily on him. "All right," he said finally. "Let's make sure we're ready, just in case." They moved through the cabin together, securing anything that might be blown around. Jake reinforced the windows with old boards he found in the corner, while Lila checked the shelves, making sure the food and supplies were safe from water damage. Every now and then the wind would howl louder than before, shaking the cabin and making them stumble slightly. Each crash of rain against the roof seemed to test their nerves, but Lila only laughed, her joy and courage contagious. "Don't stop me now, cowboy," she whispered suddenly, brushing past him with a teasing grin. Jake paused, unsure if she was serious or just playing, but he couldn't help but chuckle. Her words carried a daring edge, a hint that she wanted him to join her in embracing the storm rather than just fearing it. As night deepened, the storm's power became undeniable. Lightning illuminated the cabin in sudden bursts, followed by thunder that made the walls tremble. Lila pressed herself against Jake for a moment, shivering from the wind and the thrill of it all. He wrapped an arm around her, feeling both the need to protect and the pull of her energy, her uncontainable spirit that made even the scariest storm feel exciting. The rain intensified, sliding down the windows in heavy streams, and the wind forced the trees to sway violently. Outside, branches cracked and fell, some hitting the ground with a dull thud, others landing dangerously close to the cabin. Inside, the couple huddled together, listening to the storm's relentless voice. Lila's hand found Jake's, and she held it tightly, squeezing, as if to remind both of them that they were together, unshaken by the chaos outside. "Do you think it's going to get worse?" Jake asked quietly, not wanting to alarm her but needing to know. Lila shrugged, tilting her head back to look at the ceiling. "Maybe," she admitted. "Maybe it's already at its worst. Either way, we'll face it, together." Her confidence wasn't blind. It was a quiet trust in their ability to endure whatever nature threw at them. Hours passed like this. The storm didn't weaken, but they adapted. They moved furniture away from windows, secured loose items, and lit candles to supplement the fading light from outside. The cabin, once a peaceful retreat, had become a small fortress against the elements, and within it, Lila and Jake discovered a rhythm in their work and interaction. They spoke in low voices, shared tasks, and occasionally paused to look at each other with nervous smiles, their connection strengthening in the face of the storm. Lila found herself exploring every nook of the cabin, feeling as if each corner held a secret to surviving the night. She discovered old blankets tucked into a chest, jars of preserved fruit, and a stack of firewood hidden behind a shelf. Each find became a small victory, a way to assert control over the chaos outside. Jake noticed her enthusiasm and couldn't help but admire her even more. She didn't cower from fear, she danced with it. At one point, the wind blew with such force that a loose board from the roof clattered to the ground outside. Lila ran to the window to see what had fallen, and Jake followed, holding her arm to steady her. "You're insane," he said, half laughing, half exasperated. "I'm alive," she replied simply, turning to him with a grin that made his heart race. "And so are we. That's what matters." As the night stretched on, they took turns resting and keeping watch. The storm didn't relent, but the cabin seemed to hold against it, a testament to its sturdy build and their careful preparations. They ate a simple dinner of canned food, warming it over the fire, and found comfort in small routines, brewing tea, wrapping themselves in blankets, and sharing stories of past adventures. Each story was a reminder of how far they had come, of the life they were building together, one storm at a time. By midnight, exhaustion began to creep in. Lila, usually full of endless energy, leaned against Jake, her head resting on his shoulder. "I like this," she whispered, her voice soft but content. "Even with the storm, even with everything outside trying to scare us, I like this." Jake held her close, feeling the weight of his own worries lifting slightly. The storm was still raging, but inside the cabin, a different kind of storm had passed, one of doubt, fear, and uncertainty. They had faced it together, and now a sense of calm settled between them. Hours later, as the first hints of dawn approached, the storm showed signs of weakening. The wind's fury lessened, though the rain continued in steady sheets. Lila and Jake sat by the fireplace, sharing quiet moments of reflection. She traced patterns on the wooden floor with her finger, and he simply watched her, grateful for her presence, her courage, and her unwavering spirit. Finally, sleep began to pull them both into its gentle embrace. Lila whispered once more, her words a mix of playfulness and resolve. "Don't stop me now, cowboy." Jake smiled softly, knowing that her challenge was not just about the storm outside, but about embracing life fully, fearlessly, and together. He held her tighter, feeling a deep connection that only grew stronger in the darkness, in the storm, in the quiet moments that belonged solely to them. By the time the first light of morning filtered through the clouds, Lila and Jake had survived the storm's first trial. The cabin, battered but still standing, felt more like a home than ever. They had endured together, learned from each other, and discovered a courage that only came from facing nature's raw, unyielding power. The night had been long, frightening, and exhilarating, but in the end, it had brought them closer, forging a bond that neither the storm nor the world outside could shake. By morning, the storm had not fully passed. The rain continued in relentless sheets, and the wind, though slightly less violent, still shook the cabin and rattled the windows. Jake stood by the fireplace, feeding it carefully, while Lila moved around the small space, her energy undiminished by the long, tense night. She hummed quietly, a tune that felt almost defiant against the howling storm outside. Jake watched her with a mixture of admiration and concern. He noticed how every movement she made was purposeful yet joyful, how she seemed to find beauty in even the harshest conditions. He, on the other hand, felt the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. Every creak in the cabin, every sudden gust of wind, reminded him how fragile they truly were out here, far from the safety of the city and its conveniences. "You really don't worry at all, do you?" Jake asked, his voice quiet, almost a challenge. Lila turned toward him with a small smile. "Why would I?" Worrying doesn't change anything. We have each other, and we have this cabin. That's enough for now." Her words were simple, but they carried a confidence that both comforted and unsettled him. She had a way of seeing life as a series of adventures, even when danger was at their doorstep. The storm showed no mercy. Water began to seep through a small crack near the roof, dripping steadily onto the floor. Jake quickly grabbed a bucket, positioning it under the leak, while Lila scoured the cabin for towels and rags. Together, they moved furniture and belongings to prevent water damage, coordinating without words at times, a silent rhythm developing between them. "This is like a test, isn't it?" Lila said, her voice tinged with excitement. "A real challenge to see if we can handle life out here." Jake nodded slowly, impressed by her perspective. Most people would panic at the sight of water entering their home, but Lila treated it like a puzzle, something to be solved rather than feared. "Yeah," he said quietly, "a real test, and so far we're doing okay." They worked together for hours, securing the cabin, patching leaks, and moving anything that could be damaged. Every so often, the wind would grow louder, making the walls shake, and the rain would hit the windows in heavy, rhythmic sheets. The sound was almost deafening at times, but Lila never lost her sense of wonder. She would press her hand against the glass, laughing when a sudden gust shook the cabin. "It's alive," she whispered. "It's showing us what it can do." Jake, though still cautious, began to feel a strange sense of exhilaration. He realized that he was starting to see the storm through her eyes. Instead of only fearing the damage it could cause, he began to appreciate its raw, untamed beauty. He could almost feel the power of nature coursing through the trees, the rain, the wind, and the cabin itself. And in that moment, he understood why Lila loved it so much. Despite their efforts, the storm began to push back. A particularly strong gust of wind shook the cabin violently, causing a loose shutter to bang against the wall. Lila jumped, but quickly recovered, laughing as she helped Jake secure it. "Don't stop me now, Cowboy," she said playfully, echoing her words from the night before. Jake smiled, shaking his head in disbelief, but he joined her in the laughter, feeling a bond between them stronger than ever. By midday, exhaustion started to set in. They paused for a small meal, huddled near the fire to warm themselves. Lila had prepared a simple stew with canned vegetables and meat, the aroma filling the cabin with a sense of home despite the chaos outside. They ate in silence at first, both too tired to speak, but the shared experience created an unspoken understanding between them. Every challenge they faced seemed smaller because they faced it together. After eating, Jake suggested they try to check the cabin's exterior to see if the roof and walls had held against the storm. Lila eagerly agreed, grabbing rain jackets and boots. Stepping outside, they were immediately hit by the force of the wind and the driving rain. The forest around them was wild, trees bending and creaking, water rushing through small streams that had formed along the ground. It was chaotic and terrifying, yet strangely beautiful, a world untouched by human control. Together, they inspected the cabin, moving carefully over the slick, muddy ground. The roof had held, thankfully, and the walls showed no significant damage, though small leaks and loose shingles would need attention later. Lila's eyes shone as she took in the scene around them. "See?" she shouted over the roar of the wind. "We're okay. We're doing this." Her voice carried not just excitement but triumph, and Jake felt a swell of pride and relief. They returned inside, drenched but exhilarated. Lila quickly began drying the floors and organizing supplies, while Jake checked the fire and secured the interior. Every task they completed felt like a small victory, a proof that they were capable of surviving and thriving in this remote place. The storm, instead of breaking them, seemed to strengthen their resolve. As evening approached, the storm began to show signs of weakening. The rain was still heavy, but the wind had calmed slightly. The cabin felt safer, more like a refuge than ever. Lila sat close to the fire, her legs tucked under her, while Jake prepared a small cup of tea for each of them. They sipped in silence, listening to the distant sounds of the storm, both reflecting on the day's events. "You know," Jake said quietly, "I never imagined I could find this kind of peace in the middle of a storm." Lila tilted her head, looking at him curiously. "Peace?" "Yes," he said, smiling slightly. "It's strange, but being here with you, facing all of this, I feel alive in a way I haven't in a long time. And somehow, I trust that we can get through anything together." Lila smiled back, leaning against him. "Exactly. That's what I mean when I say this is an adventure. The danger, the chaos, it's part of life. And life is better when you don't run from it." The storm raged on outside, but inside they found warmth, comfort, and connection. Every crack of thunder, every gust of wind, became a reminder of how small they were in the world, and yet how strong they could be when they faced it together. Lila's playful, daring spirit kept Jake engaged, challenged, and inspired, while his steady, protective nature reassured her. They balanced each other perfectly, a team forged in the fire of adversity. Later, as night fell again, the storm's intensity began to fade. They sat together near the fire, wrapped in blankets, listening to the last distant rumbles of thunder. Lila rested her head on Jake's shoulder, her hair damp from the day's rain. "Don't stop me now, cowboy," she whispered again, a playful reminder that even in exhaustion, her spirit remained unbroken. Jake chuckled softly, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. "I'm not going to stop you," he said, feeling a warmth in his chest that had little to do with the fire. "I think I'm starting to understand why you love this so much." As the cabin grew quieter and the storm's fury diminished to a gentle patter against the roof, they finally allowed themselves to relax. They spoke softly of plans for the coming days, of repairs that would need to be made, of the life they wanted to build in this isolated paradise. Despite the challenges, despite the fear, they were filled with hope and excitement. The night settled over them, calmer than before, and they fell asleep close together, the fire flickering low, shadows dancing across the walls. Outside, the storm had tested their limits, their courage, and their patience. Inside, they had discovered resilience, trust, and a deeper understanding of each other. It was a day of survival, growth, and connection, a day that would be remembered not for fear, but for the joy of facing life's challenges hand in hand. In that cabin, in the middle of a storm, Lila and Jake learned that life was not just about avoiding danger, but about embracing it with courage, laughter, and love. Every crash of thunder, every gust of wind became a testament to their bond and the whispered words that had become a mantra between them. "Don't stop me now, cowboy," echoed in both their hearts, a reminder that together they could face anything. By the following morning, the storm had changed its tone. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, but the wind still carried bursts of power, shaking the trees and making the forest around the cabin look wild and untamed. Jake and Lila had managed to rest through the night, though the storm's echoes still lingered in the form of creaking walls and intermittent gusts that rattled the windows. The cabin, though battered, had held firm, standing as a small fortress against the force of nature. They moved about the cabin quietly, each performing small tasks to keep things in order. Lila gathered blankets and dried towels, arranging them in a neat pile near the fireplace, while Jake inspected the corners of the cabin for damage he might have missed the day before. The earlier chaos had taught them a rhythm, a balance between vigilance and calm, that allowed them to feel competent even in isolation. Suddenly, a loud crash erupted from outside. Both of them jumped, hearts racing. They ran to the window and saw that a large tree, weakened by the storm's force, had fallen dangerously close to the cabin. Its trunk lay twisted across the ground, branches spread like arms, some just inches from the wall. Lila's eyes widened with a mix of awe and concern. "That could have been us," she whispered, her voice tense but steady. Jake's mind raced. He knew the tree could cause serious damage if another gust pushed it further, and he immediately thought of ways to stabilize the situation. "We need to make sure nothing else is at risk," he said, his tone firm but calm. "We can handle this together, but we have to be careful." Lila nodded, rolling up her sleeves. "Lead the way," she said, her usual fearless energy returning, though now tempered with caution. She grabbed a flashlight and some ropes they had used earlier to secure the cabin. Jake took the other end, and together they stepped outside into the wet, muddy forest, careful with each footstep. The ground was slippery, and the branches of fallen trees threatened to trip them, but neither hesitated. Working together, they examined the fallen tree, considering how to prevent it from rolling further. Jake found sturdy rocks and wedged them beneath sections of the trunk, while Lila held the rope in place, tying it around the tree to limit movement. The rain continued to fall, soaking their clothes and hair, but neither complained. The adrenaline and focus kept them moving, and even in the fear of danger, they found a strange exhilaration. "This is insane," Jake said, glancing at Lila as she secured another knot. "I can't believe we're doing this." Lila looked back with a grin, water dripping from her hair onto her face. "Insane is one way to put it," she said, "but we're alive and we're doing it. That's what counts." Hours passed as they worked meticulously to stabilize the tree and assess the surrounding area. Small branches were cleared, rocks were positioned, and loose debris was moved to prevent further accidents. Every gust of wind reminded them of nature's unpredictability, but each small victory, the rope holding firm, the tree balanced safely, the cabin intact, brought a sense of accomplishment and relief. By late afternoon, the worst of the immediate danger had passed, but the storm had left its mark on the landscape. Muddy streams ran in places that had been dry, branches littered the ground, and distant trees leaned dangerously, waiting for the next strong wind. Lila and Jake stood side by side, breathing heavily, but smiling with satisfaction. They had faced the storm together, and in doing so, had discovered a new level of trust and teamwork. Returning to the cabin, soaked and exhausted, they finally allowed themselves a moment of rest. Lila collapsed onto a chair near the fireplace, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. Jake sat across from her, drying his hair with a towel, still feeling the adrenaline slowly fade from his veins. "I never thought I'd find this kind of strength in myself," Jake admitted quietly, watching the rain still falling outside. Lila's eyes softened as she looked at him. "It's always been there," she said gently. "You just never had the right moment to see it. The storm, it's a teacher. It shows you what you're capable of." Jake nodded, a sense of awe washing over him. He had always been practical, cautious, careful, but now he saw that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the ability to act despite it, and watching Lila face every gust, every obstacle, he realized that her fearlessness wasn't reckless. It was a different kind of wisdom, one that balanced instinct, awareness, and trust. Evening settled over the cabin, and the storm finally began to lose its strength. The wind became gentler and the rain slowed to a soft patter. Inside, the warmth of the fire and the cozy glow of the cabin offered a contrast to the wildness outside. Lila and Jake prepared a small dinner, their movements synchronized from days of shared effort. Each meal, each task, now carried a deeper meaning. They were more than survival. They were proving to themselves that they could thrive, not just endure. After dinner, they sat close together, talking softly about their experiences. Lila recounted the moments that had thrilled her the most, the rush of wind, the crash of branches, the sense of facing the unknown and surviving it. Jake listened, nodding and sometimes laughed at her exaggerated excitement, but he also shared his own perspective. The moments that had terrified him, the choices he had made to keep them safe, and the pride he felt in their teamwork. "You make fear look, interesting," Jake said finally, his voice tinged with amusement. "I don't think I've ever felt fear quite like this before." "It's different with you." Lila smiled, brushing his arm. "It's not about ignoring fear," she said. "It's about turning it into something useful, something that makes you stronger, something that reminds you you're alive." Their conversation faded into a comfortable silence, broken only by the occasional gust of wind and the gentle crackle of the fire. Lila leaned against Jake, her energy finally mellowing after the day's exertions. He held her close, feeling a profound sense of connection. They had faced danger together, and that shared experience had bonded them in a way words could not fully express. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, the cabin grew quiet. The storm had receded, leaving behind only the sound of soft rain on the roof and the distant rustle of the forest. Lila's voice broke the silence, playful yet confident. "Don't stop me now, cowboy," she whispered, echoing the phrase that had become their mantra during the storm. Jake laughed softly, shaking his head. "I'm not stopping you," he said, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. "I think I'm starting to enjoy this adventure more than I ever expected." They settled into bed, exhausted but satisfied. Every crack of thunder, every gust of wind from the past days had tested them, but it had also shown them their limits and their strengths. The cabin, battered but standing, was a testament to their resilience and teamwork. Lila's playful spirit and Jake's steady nature had created a perfect balance, allowing them not only to survive but to grow together. As they drifted into sleep, the night outside felt calm for the first time in days. The storm had pushed them to their limits, challenged their courage, and demanded their full attention, but it had also given them something far more valuable, the knowledge that together they could face anything. Each whispered phrase, each small laugh, each shared effort had become part of their story, a story of endurance, love, and unshakable trust. In that moment, Lila and Jake realized that the storm, while fierce and terrifying, had strengthened them in ways they could never have imagined. They had faced nature's fury together and had come out stronger, braver, and more connected than ever. And even as sleep took them into its embrace, the words that had carried them through the chaos echoed in their hearts. "Don't stop me now, cowboy." By the following morning, the storm had finally begun to fully release its grip. The sky was still gray and heavy with clouds, but the rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle, and the wind had softened to a steady whisper through the trees. The cabin, which had endured the storm's full force, stood strong, its wooden walls weathered but unbroken. Lila stepped outside first, pulling her jacket tight against the damp air, her eyes scanning the forest that had been wild and chaotic only hours before. Jake followed behind her, his boots squelching in the muddy ground. He paused to look around, taking in the scene, branches scattered across the yard. Small streams formed where the water had rushed downhill, and the familiar scent of wet earth filling the air. It was beautiful in a way that was almost impossible to describe, raw, alive, and utterly untouched by human hands. Despite the destruction, or perhaps because of it, the forest felt alive, vibrant, and full of possibility. Lila inhaled deeply, letting the fresh mountain air fill her lungs. "It's amazing," she said softly, a smile spreading across her face. "Even after everything, it's still beautiful. Still ours." Jake nodded, standing beside her, feeling the weight of the past days settle into a quiet relief. "We made it," he said simply. "We really made it." His eyes met hers, and for a moment the exhaustion, fear, and adrenaline of the storm seemed to fall away. All that remained was the bond they had strengthened, the trust they had built, and the knowledge that they had faced something bigger than themselves and come through together. The two of them spent the morning clearing debris from around the cabin. Fallen branches were gathered and stacked neatly, mud was brushed from the porch, and small streams were redirected away from the foundation to prevent future flooding. Every task was a small victory, a way to reclaim their home from the storm's chaos. Lila moved with her usual energy, laughter escaping her lips when Jake slipped on the muddy ground, while Jake responded with a gentle shake of his head, amused and relieved that they were safe. As they worked, Lila's attention was drawn to a section of the forest where a tree had fallen but not damaged the cabin. She walked over, brushing rain from her jacket, and knelt to examine the roots and branches. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the intricate patterns of the roots exposed by the storm. "Even in destruction there's beauty. Life always finds a way." Jake came over, crouching beside her. "You always notice things like that," he said with a small smile. "I'm too focused on making sure we don't get hurt to see the beauty." "That's why we work," Lila replied lightly. "You keep us safe, and I keep us awake." She grinned, and he chuckled, feeling a warmth in his chest that had little to do with the fire they had built the night before. By midday, the sun began to break through the clouds, casting soft light over the wet forest. The cabin, surrounded by the green, glistening trees, looked like a small haven, untouched and enduring. They paused to sit on the porch, sipping tea that Lila had brewed over the small camping stove they had kept ready. The warmth of the drink seeped into their bones, and for a few moments, the world felt still. "I can't believe how much we learned from this," Jake said quietly, staring at the forest. "About ourselves, about each other, and even about life." Lila nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "It's strange," she said. "The storm was terrifying, but it also taught us so much. Courage, patience, teamwork, love, all of it." Her voice was soft, but full of conviction, and Jake felt his heart swell at her words. They had been tested, yes, but they had also grown, and the experience had given them something far more valuable than just survival. It had given them insight into the depth of their connection. As they finished their tea, Lila jumped up with renewed energy, brushing off her jacket. "Let's take a walk," she said. "I want to see the forest after the storm. I want to feel it, touch it, be part of it." Jake hesitated for a moment, looking at the muddy ground, but then he smiled and followed her. He trusted her instinct, and he knew that these small adventures were what she lived for, and he had come to appreciate them as well. They walked slowly along a narrow path that wound through the forest. The rain had left tiny streams trickling along the sides, and the leaves glistened as sunlight began to filter through the branches. Birds cautiously emerged, chirping softly, and the smell of wet earth and pine filled the air. Every step they took was a reminder of how alive the forest was, how it had endured the storm and was now healing in its own quiet way. At a small clearing, Lila stopped and turned to Jake, her eyes sparkling. "We did it," she said simply. "We survived the storm, and we're still standing, stronger than ever." Jake took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We did," he agreed, "and I feel different, braver, more alive than I've felt in years. And it's all because we faced it together." They stayed in the clearing for a long while, enjoying the calm after the storm. Lila pointed out broken branches and small pools of water, laughing as she tried to balance on a slippery log. Jake joined her, cautiously at first, then with more confidence as he realized that these small moments of playfulness were just as important as the serious work of survival. They laughed together, the sound echoing through the forest, a perfect contrast to the storm's roar from the previous days. As evening approached, they returned to the cabin, tired but filled with a quiet contentment. They prepared a small dinner, cooking over the fireplace and sharing stories of the city life they had left behind. Every laugh, every shared memory was a reminder of how far they had come. The storm had tested them, yes, but it had also strengthened their love, their trust, and their sense of self. After dinner, they stepped outside once more. The forest was calm now, the sun dipping low in the sky, casting golden light over the wet trees. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth and pine. Lila took a deep breath, closing her eyes, and whispered softly, "Don't stop me now, cowboy." Jake laughed, shaking his head, but he understood her meaning. It was more than a playful phrase. It was a promise to embrace life fully, together, no matter what challenges might come. They sat together on the porch, watching as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. The cabin, their small fortress, stood strong and welcoming. The forest around them, though battered, was alive and healing, a perfect reflection of their own journey through the storm. Lila leaned against Jake, and he held her close, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. For the first time in days, they allowed themselves to simply exist, to enjoy the moment, and to be grateful for each other. Night fell slowly, and the stars began to peek through the clouds that still lingered. The air was crisp, cool, and refreshing, carrying with it the quiet sounds of the forest. Lila and Jake stayed on the porch, wrapped in blankets, talking softly about their plans for the coming days. The repairs the cabin would need, and the life they wanted to build in this remote paradise. Every word they spoke was filled with hope, courage, and love. As they prepared to sleep, the storm was finally nothing more than a memory, replaced by a sense of calm and renewal. The cabin had survived, they had survived, and their bond had grown stronger than ever. Lila's whispered phrase, repeated throughout the storm, echoed in their hearts once more. "Don't stop me now, cowboy." It had become more than words. It was a symbol of their resilience, their courage, and their shared spirit. Lila rested her head on Jake's chest as they lay together in the quiet cabin. The fire had burned low, casting soft shadows across the walls, and the gentle drip of rain from the roof provided a soothing rhythm. Jake held her tightly, feeling a sense of accomplishment and contentment he had never known before. Together they had faced fear, uncertainty, and chaos, and they had emerged stronger, braver, and more connected than ever. The night stretched on, peaceful and quiet, and for the first time since their journey began, both Lila and Jake allowed themselves to fully relax. The storm had tested them, but it had also taught them the depth of their love, the power of trust, and the joy of living fully in the present. They drifted into sleep, comforted by each other and by the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. In that quiet, storm-worn cabin, surrounded by a forest that had endured and survived just as they had, Lila and Jake realized that life's greatest adventures were not only about surviving storms, but about embracing them, fear, excitement, and all. And as they slept, the whispered words that had carried them through the chaos became a gentle promise for the future, a reminder that together they could face anything. "Don't stop me now, cowboy."